after that, we'll have the breakout rooms. And during our planning meeting, we discussed that the reality for the different ages has been very different. So you'll see breakout rooms for elementary, middle school, high school, and then an adult faculty and staff focus. So I'm very excited to, as I listen to introductions, to hear all the youth connections. So I think the conversations in our breakout rooms will be rich. So I appreciate everybody coming on this call. In addition to this, for our Alliance members, we had some difficulty with our survey. So when I get a chance, Alliance members, I'm going to put the link in the chat box for Alliance members just to complete the survey. And the survey is focused on your youth services, because we know the geographical area of Pinal County is large, but then also our depth and frequency of services looks different across the entire county. So we're hoping to get a better picture of youth services with through all of our Alliance members. So with that, I am going to invite Lisa Schroeder with Apache Junction Unified Schools just to speak a little bit about what she is seeing within her district regarding needs and challenges.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for including me in on this. So some things that we're seeing over here in the East Valley is I am seeing a lot of students coming through with self-harm. I am seeing a lot of students come through with educational learning gaps that are much more large and diverse than in previous years. I'm seeing students and families, a lot of them struggling with a lot of McKinney-Vento and having to give them those resources. Gosh, let me think what else. We're seeing a large amount of students questioning with LGBTQ community and struggling to find specific resources for them so that it's more tailored to fit that type of need. I think that's the bulk of what we're seeing here is just those types of issues happening and coming through the school. As far as services go, our school has just now taken some of those ESSER funds and they put into place 2 social workers for our district. So we have one that is focused with our elementary scene and our K through 6, and then the other one is focused within our 7 through 12. And they're contracting out, it appears, I think, for next year to bring in some behavioral support outside of the current behavioral team that we have in place within the schools to assist them when they travel from school to school, in the sense of doing pull-out groups for some therapeutic type practices. Each campus has a behavior coach right now, and a counseling team is more prevalent actually at the high school. At the elementary, we have predominantly behavior coaches and sort of an administrative team, but they don't necessarily have a counselor that's designated to the K through 6. So that's essentially where we are. We partner quite heavily with Project Help, which is a community-based resource program that helps families in need in the short term, and then we refer out from there. So there's a lot of supports that you would receive for some of your McKinney-Vento families through the Project Help. There is a process that they have to apply to for that. And of course, there's the other outside resources that most of us use, like food banks and things like that. But as far as, like, for example, if you have a student that needs athletic fees paid, that would be appropriate for like a Project Help family in need. And we would give them those supports that they need for the short term and then hook them up for the long term of what they need out in the community for resources. Did I miss anything? I'm sorry, I jumped on late because of audio and I wasn't sure where to go with that, but any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Lisa. I wrote down Project Help in capital letters because I have not heard of that. So I'll be researching that after this meeting. And then Shanetta Osei, are you comfortable sharing a little bit of what you're seeing on your campus?
Sure, absolutely. We're a pre-K through 8th grade school. There's 3 different campuses, and I'm not surprised to say that we're seeing some of the same things that Lisa Schroeder mentioned, even at such an early age. I am really puzzled by how many of our kids are already starting to deal with so many issues at a younger age that we previously hadn't seen before. So along with the McKinney-Vento issues, the LGBTQ issues, We're also seeing some drug-related issues, you know, students bringing drugs onto campus or, you know, things like that. Heavy stress. We're also having the cutting, self-harm, and a lot of transition. We're having many students move into the area, you know, coming from different parts of the country and as well as different parts of Arizona. I see kids that are coming to school tired, you know, sleep deprived, because they haven't been sleeping, and they're telling us about that. They're falling asleep in class and trying to, you know, keep them engaged. So I see them also dealing with grief and loss issues. They've lost so many people, you know, grandparents and even some parents. So it's pretty tremendous.
There's guys working out there, so if you're gonna go out like that, they're unloading the boxes now.
Yeah, so those are some of the issues. We have a little bit more incidents of students starting more drama on campus with their peers and just not knowing how to interact. So we're seeing some internet kind of bullying, that type of thing, actually occurring even at the, you know, 5th grade level. That's something that typically wouldn't occur until junior high. So we're seeing younger ages participating in this kind of behavior. So here on campus, there's been some pull to really look at the school climate and the school environment. So our superintendent has done some school spirit activities to help change the school environment. We've also had some teacher recognition programs because our teachers are tired. They're tired too, and they're also going through some of the same things that our students are, you know, as far as just trying to find a new normal. So it's important to keep our staff, you know, engaged in knowing that we appreciate their effort in dealing with all these new issues. We've had some tea parties at our primary school, which kind of engages our students in just learning how to reconnect socially and just have fun. So we've been trying to do some fun things with our kids just so that they can be kids again, because for so long they have not had that social interaction with their peers and behaving appropriately. So we've had some school dances, which they haven't had a chance to do in maybe 2 years. So it feels like some of them are coming out of the dark. We're also going to be embarking on Character Strong, which is an SEL program, which engages the students and staff and looking at positive mindsets and helping people to really look at how to be resilient. I've heard that word a lot today, but resilient and bouncing back for all of us, and just reconnecting with each other in a positive way. We've also been looking at collaborating with Pinal County. They've been doing classroom presentations at our junior high and our intermediate school on healthy relationships and how to recognize toxic relationships, which is so important at this time. And if we can get our kids back on track, I think socially, emotionally, then we can really tackle the academics, which is that's a major struggle. That's a major struggle, but we know that relationships help kids learn better. Also looking at doing some collaboration with CG Alliance with drug education for student families and our teachers. So that's a little bit about what's going on in Eloy. Yes, so thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. I appreciate that. Yeah, we've had to reintroduce the word FaceTime to not being a social media connection, and we have FaceTime space to start building face-to-face conversation with students again. So I definitely connect with that. Thank you. Richard, are you able to share a little bit about what you're seeing on your campus and then your work with youth in other capacities also?
Thank you for letting me share for a little bit. So from an ASU Preparatory Academy standpoint, we have a lot of campuses throughout Arizona, mostly in Phoenix and the Casa Grande area. We also have an ASU Digital. And what we're finding is with the ASU Digital especially, things still occur digitally as well that normally go on with teenagers and with younger youth. And so we're really struggling to find out what we can do remotely with those, but we do have some counselors that are attached to our ASU Digital portion as well. What we also find is we have all the standard things that Shanetta spoke of as well. And, you know, it doesn't matter. It's interesting what we're finding. I'm reaching out to even some Midwest schools and so forth that I used to be a part of years ago. And it's amazing that proportionately, the number of students you still have proportionately the number of issues for those students. So I guess that's good news and bad news at the same time. What we're finding across all of our ASU preparatory academy schools is the same issues coming up with all the other youth. And we are pre-K through 12. And it's amazing, one of the things that just recently was brought out, which shocked me, is some statistics on pornography, which is really interesting. And average age now of exposure to pornography is 8 years old. And I'm not sure what I was doing at 8, probably trading a frog for a bat that I got somewhere or something. But anyway, so we're dealing with some of that. We also have some of the online cyberbullying and so forth that goes on. We're finding too that no matter what the demographic of your school or socioeconomic status of your school, that drug and alcohol is still an issue. With the advent of marijuana being legalized in Arizona, it's kind of shifted to other drug and alcohol related issues as well. And that's why we're going to be partnering also with Casa Grande Alliance to come on campus and do some presentations for the kids as well. Some of the things that we're finding, we do a social emotional survey here on this campus in Casa Grande. We typically do it every Monday morning. We didn't have school yesterday, so we did it this morning. And on those, we just ask about 6 or 7 different questions about how they're feeling, how their week went, what are they looking forward to this week, and what are some things that they think that they need to discuss with us if they want to discuss some things with us. There's about 3 of us that handle that survey. We're now beginning to share that with all the other ASU prep campuses. And it gives us an opportunity to meet with the students individually. And it's amazing. I know this is going to be a shocker. Sometimes the grades and the SEL survey results match. If their grades are declining and it's for them, I have the privilege outside of here of being a marriage, family, and children's therapist. So I get to do some of that, knowing my boundaries here at school. And then we do some internal short therapy is what I call it. And then we refer out as well, just like the other schools are doing as well. And we just really appreciate all of our partners that we have in the communities, because guess what? We can't do it all. And even outside of here as a therapist, I can't do it all. We need to work together. And thank you all for participating in that. It's amazing. Sometimes when you think about the schools, you think, oh, it's just the schools. They need to handle that within the schools. And no, we need you, as well as we can do some things with you through our resources and our services that we have as well. Next year on this campus, we're adding a dynamic. We have the Barcelona soccer team that have students that live on campus at the hotel here at Francisco Grande. And that adds a different dynamic as well. We also have 7th and 8th graders currently that are being facilitated through ASU Digital. However, they will be partially brought in next year, next school year, and that will add a different dynamic as well, because they are dealing with things that the 9th through 12th graders don't deal with, and vice versa. So a lot of things happening, a lot of things going on. We're very excited as we move forward. And I'm excited too that we're doing this on youth, and that we have the different school districts that are now becoming more involved in this program. I appreciate you coordinating that, Bob, really do. That's all I have.
Thank you, Richard. I like the proportionality of needs you discussed, because as districts start bringing forward different educational options on their menu for families, we too found we had to get a counselor tied to our online school quickly because of need surfacing. So thank you for that. Bob and Roberto, the floor is all yours to share your insights and some of the good work you're doing.
Thanks, Yetta. Really, I want to hand it over to Roberto to start out with, to provide a little context, and then I want to talk through some of the survey results. I was first introduced to Roberto through Jeff Lavender. Gosh, it seems like years ago now. But we've been kind of talking about, how do we push more in a, culturally responsive, youth-friendly direction, so we can get more youth engaged and on board. And we've, this past year, Roberto was our keynote speaker for our virtual youth conference last spring. And then also, we've been working together, I think since August, working with kids in our Youth Alliance effort. And, it's slowly developing, I think, because of COVID and the ongoing pandemic, but I think we're really heading in a positive, helpful direction. So Roberto.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Bob. Good morning. I'm also grateful to be with you all today. And I have a short presentation I would like to share with you all. So I'm just sort of framing this up as the Pinal County creating thriving and growth during tumultuous times. And so I'm hoping to briefly touch on a few objectives here. Want to give a little bit of a background to underscore a lot of what has been shared so far regarding the traumatic stress people are currently experiencing, both nationally, as well as getting into some of the specifics within Casa Grande. Also going to be sharing a model for adolescent growth and thriving. I think it'd be helpful for you all to know that I'm also a researcher. So I come into this work with 20 years working with youth and also doing research. So kind of combining the practice-based evidence and the evidence-based practice. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit of that research as a framing for this discussion. And then we're going to jump into the well-being survey and the results. And I think we can all pretty much agree, and again, this is coming up already in the conversation, we are living in some historic times with epic levels of trauma and grief. I know a lot of you are seeing this firsthand. There's over 886,000 people have died from COVID-19 in the US. Over 140,000 students have lost a parent or guardian since the pandemic started. And that does not account for folks, as people are sharing this morning, who lost a grandparent or an auntie or a prima or a cousin. So that number is actually much higher if you take that into account. And we know that there's been a disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. For example, Black Americans make up 13% of the population, yet 34% of all deaths. The Latinx community, we've been catching COVID at 5 times the rate of our white counterparts, mainly because the Latinos disproportionately are working in these essential industries like agriculture and meat packing, as is the case here in Chicago. Also, a recent report suggests that 78% of youth are indicating that they're chronically disengaged in school, particularly in online virtual environments. There's just a huge level of fatigue, 30% deterioration of mental health and well-being, according to the Americans Promise Alliance 2020 report. And if that were not enough, there's also been the vicarious trauma, particularly for students and people of color, witnessing the blatant racism and murder of folks at the hands of police officers. And we know that this is kicking up a lot of historical trauma in these communities of color. And a lot of this is important to also underscore the importance of schools as the most important sites for students of color in particular to receive mental health support. You know, there's a researcher and an author named Dr. Larry Gross, and he came up with this term called post-apocalyptic stress syndrome. He calls it PASS. And he explains that that's when a culture can experience such a massive shock that it never fully recovers. And so he even goes as far to, you know, discussing that some of the impacts of the Black Plague took 200 years for Europe to recuperate from. He talks about the intergenerational impact of things like genocide with Native Americans and how folks are still dealing with the adverse impacts of that even today. As we're kind of talking about some of the historical piece, I just wanted to briefly define what historical trauma is. It's something that can be defined as a constellation of characteristics associated with massive cumulative group trauma across generations, as put out by Braveheart a few years ago. But what we know with historical trauma in particular is that if young people don't learn how to metabolize that traumatic stress, is that it can play out to having these PTSD symptoms in their lives in the contemporary present. There's a causal relationship between some of these things being activated and uncontrollable hypervigilance. So particularly when I'm hearing, you know, that young folks are, you know, feeling overwhelmed, and hearing that you all are sharing that a lot of young people are self-medicating to try to calm down. Some of these things are directly correlated, as well as worries about future negative events, feelings of isolation, perceiving others as dangerous. And all that plays out academically with impairments in school performance, lower GPA, absenteeism, and suspensions. And so I just want to take a moment here. I know we've heard from a few folks already on the line, but I'm just interested to hear if others have also been seeing perhaps some of this intergenerational, this historical trauma playing out with young folks that you're seeing in your family or in your work right now. I just want to invite you to maybe chime into the chat. Are you seeing any of this playing out with your youth? So I'm seeing that there's some homelessness happening with families and youth. Folks are looking for resources, basic resources like housing. Anything else? So as you all are kind of chiming in there.
So this is Richard
Yes.
Cunningham. So what we're finding from an from ASU Prep Academy standpoint, you know, we're by the way a public charter school set of schools. What we're finding is we have a diverse, as most of the school systems do, have a really diverse group of students who attend here. We have Native American, we have Hispanic, we have African American, Caucasian. I mean, the full gambit. And along with that, there's some very strong cultural factors that are brought in with those students. So, you know, my parents always did this, so I do this type of thing. Very strong cultural, and it's hard, yes. It's difficult sometimes to break those barriers down. But once we do, we find that there are some of these things going on, parents dying, grandparents dying, close relatives, not knowing how to process those things as well. And we're finding, only because it's proportional by population, gender, race, religion, not because of any other deficiency, but or inequality, but we're finding that it's very proportionate. The number per student, the number of students that are having difficulties in one culture, one background, one race, one religion is having the same difficulties in the others. So it's kind of even across the board, it seems like nowadays.
Yep. Thank you so much for sharing that, Richard. I really appreciate it. Also just want to lift up some of the comments coming in from the chats, folks talking about, you know, lack of a better term, but a COVID guilt or shame that's happening with folks, and other mental health issues for sure. So what I want to just do briefly is add to your toolbox and your vocabulary another term. There's been a lot of discussion already about resilience, and I think resilience is really important and really powerful. But there's another term that I found to be particularly interesting and important in this time, and this is a term called post-traumatic growth. And so it's similar to resilience in the sense that both of these phenomenon deal with someone who's had an adverse experience. Resilience is coming back to baseline, but post-traumatic growth is really a phenomenon where folks grow because of this traumatic experience. They oftentimes experience a heightened sense of purpose, closer interpersonal relationships, a sense of empowerment, right? And so I really want to frame this discussion today in a positive, hopeful light to go along with everybody's words that have been so uplifting and positive, that what if this moment, both nationally and also in Pinal County, is an opportunity to slingshot forward with an unprecedented level of growth and healing and thriving that otherwise would not be able to happen. And so I want to share, along with this notion of growth, some consistent ideas around thriving. And so myself and Dr. Juan Carlos Arrauz, we took a lot of the research from the Search Institute, which many of you may be familiar with. There have been like a positive youth development powerhouse really coming out of Minneapolis. And we took some of their ideas around thriving, and we began to kind of mix that with ideas of post-traumatic growth and how to do this in culturally sustaining ways. So one of the key pieces for growth and thriving is that young people need to have positive, consistent, developmental relationships with someone other than a parent. Particularly, this is true with adolescents who are trying to really understand their identity, right? And so more specifically, these relationships need to be with adults who can support young folks in nurturing, and I have here racial and cultural and ethnic, but really these interpersonal and intersectional identities, right? Along the lines of sex and gender and ethnicity and even spirituality, right? There's a need for adults to become elders who can really nurture and mentor these young folks in this particular way. In addition to that, we need to be attentive to the holistic needs of young people, but not looking at it in a way that they're deficient or lacking in any way, but also really, as Richard was saying, you know, seeing the cultural assets, seeing the cultural strengths that youth and their families are already practicing, right? There's lots of research that suggests that when young people have opportunities to discover these strengths and to practice these things in out of school time or in schools, that they do better socially, emotionally, physically, mentally, and even academically. And beyond that, there's a really strong line of literature that suggests that in order for young people to really heal, to really experience a sense of thriving, that they need to have an authentic opportunity to share their voice. It's this notion that young people are created to make some noise. And if they're given an authentic opportunity to use that voice to make a joyful noise, they can bring a lot to the table, right? But if they don't have that opportunity, they will bang on something. They will use that voice to cut other people, right? They will bully, they will be screaming out for attention in other ways. And so part of my question as we begin to really reflect is, how are we giving young folks in this county an authentic opportunity to use that voice in a constructive, healing way? And so part of my work, as Bob alluded to, has been building relationships with folks in Casa Grande. And it's been a joy connecting with the Casa Grande Youth Alliance. And, you know, as we got to know each other, I came in as the keynote, They said, you know, big bro, we're really concerned about the well-being of our peers. Is there any way that you can help us to figuring out what's going on, you know, more rigorously with our peers? Well, as it turned out, we had just created a well-being survey with folks in Stanford. And I said, well, we have this survey. I want you guys to beat it up. I want you to make it your own. I want you to take stuff out, add stuff to it. And they did. And so with Bob's support and the support of this youth leadership group, we were able to get this administered to over 1,500 young folks around Casa Grande. And what I might do right now is just pass this over to Bob, but keeping in mind that a lot of what informed this youth wellness survey, again, is on these positive developmental relationships with adults, around young people finding their cultural identity and nurturing these cultural assets. Also mental health, physical health, but also trying to explore that youth leadership and youth voice component as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bob.
Thanks, Roberto. We worked on developing the survey in August and September, and I think we got it to schools in October, and it took quite a while for schools to approve. And, you know, it's been quite a process. Plus, you know, pandemic, it's just, you know, it's been really interesting. We're still getting responses to the surveys. Primarily right now, we have responses from the 3 high schools in Casa Grande. And we broke the survey into 3 shorter surveys. First is culture, confidence, mental health, and social media. Second is supported people and community. Third is stressors, substances, and school. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on the survey results, but I think there are a couple of really interesting kinds of things that I think stood out to me in this initial assessment. And by no means am I a statistician. So I kind of think in terms of positive response or negative response. And I've kind of highlighted positive responses and a majority of negative responses on some of the questions. And I think there are some in the middle of this pack, there are some questions like, my life will make a difference in the world, and the majority didn't agree with that. I expect good things to happen to me. The majority didn't agree with that. I feel like I'm an important part of my community, didn't agree with that as well. And then the other thing at the bottom of this list, setbacks don't discourage me. And again, that response to that one was primarily negative as well. So there's just a lot more data here, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. But you know, to me, in this, we asked people where they stand right now, where they think they'll stand in 5 years, you know, what kind of emotional, social support they get. And I think it's kind of an interesting result. Survey 2 was, there's more on survey 1 related to social media. And I think it's really interesting. You think that young people are doing Facebook? According to the survey, not even close. It's all Twitter and Instagram and some TikTok, Snapchat as well. And it looks like about half of the kids really don't engage a lot with social media. So I think there's just a ton of interesting results here. And there was one other thing I wanted to point out in survey 2 is kind of in the middle of the pack here, again, kind of overly negative responses. My opinion is important because it could someday make a difference in my community or school. There are plenty of ways for me to have a say in what our community or school does. It is important to me that I make my voice heard in local community issues. Most communities and school leaders would listen to me. So I don't know, it felt to me like that response was more negative than it was positive. And what I see in that is opportunity. I really genuinely see opportunity. And I think that, you know, finding ways to more intentionally engage and involve the voice of youth, I think is so important, especially for the kids. Well, and I think it's a systemic thing. I think we've got to find better ways to come together to be supportive of youth and families and communities.
Yep. So just two things here to kind of support what Bob is highlighting is that, you know, a lot of these scores really are kind of falling in the neutral category, you know, with some, of course, especially around mental health and trauma, you know, a lot of you saying, hey, this is a major issue going on here. I think it was something like 80% were indicating how big of an issue this was. But to underscore what Bob is talking about, there's a lot of young people who are in this kind of lukewarm space, right? As it relates to them feeling affirmed in their cultural assets, as it relates to them, you know, having access to positive adults and mentors in their life, as it relates to them having an opportunity for youth, an authentic youth voice. And so, you know, I think what Bob is sharing here with these, you know, surveys is important. We have a great opportunity to create an ecosystem for authentic healing and growth and thriving to occur. Now is the moment. And like Bob was saying, you know, it's going to be more than just another program or another intervention. It's going to take some systemic work. And I think along with that, and we can get into the discussion too, is what role can young people even have in the policies, the plans of action, the programming priorities that move forward is one thing I would have us to consider.
So thanks, Roberto. Just a couple of final thoughts. You know, this is intended to be youth-centered, youth-focused, youth and adult partnership. But kind of next, as we kind of wind down the survey, which has been open for the last couple of months, we will work with the Youth Alliance students to analyze the survey. We intend to train them to conduct focus groups to dig in deeper on some of the things they think are the top priorities. We really want to get everybody to align on what they think are the top priorities, which we can also break out by school. And then also, I think ultimately what we'd like for this to do is to help to provide direction for designing culturally relevant, arts-based and/or community projects to shine a spotlight on what matters most to youth in our community. So that was probably longer than 5 minutes, and it probably went, Roberto took it a lot deeper than I expected. However, it was all awesome. So thank you, sir. And I'll pass it back to Yetta.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob and Roberto. I'm going to connect to what Roberto said about some of the silver linings that we have seen through this storm. And one of them is that districts have realized we need to offer different learning platforms for families where they're at. And then seeing the resources to back it has been very hopeful to see moving forward. And then the focus being given to SEL and behavior and mental health on schools, almost coming into balance with academics, has been good to see. So I'm glad to hear of new positions being hired and new programming and resources being brought in. And I will tell you, you all spoke to that neutral zone you saw on surveys. We did the panorama education surveys, and that neutral zone was very big for us also. So our conversations are focusing around how are we going to be able to shift the bell curve so that we know we're providing services and the best supports to students. So with that, we have now come to the time of the breakout rooms, the small group discussions. And again, there will be 4. There'll be an elementary focus, middle school, high school, faculty, and staff. You're welcome to choose the one that seems to connect to you more. And then within those times, we're going to ask you to consider what needs or growth areas have surfaced, what strengths have emerged, and what have we learned that we didn't even know we didn't know. And so I can speak for our district. We learned and didn't realize we had to increase our broadband network. We had to increase our hotspots. We had to bring in the infrastructure for our families. So that was something we didn't even know was a problem until these last few years. So with that, Bob, I believe I can open up the rooms. I've set them for 15 minutes and then.
So just a quick wrap up from the groups that we broke out into. And I don't know about you guys, but the conversation in our group could have gone on for the rest of the morning, I think. So, but in the interest of time, can we ask one person from each group to report out, starting with the elementary group? Any takers? Anybody?
Okay, I guess I'll go.
Thank you, Jessica.
So we talked a lot about just the ways that technology has changed things. We talked about how, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like gonna pull up my notes now. Okay, so we talked about the ways that that teachers and students both are needing more behavioral health. There's now counselors that are available in schools, whereas before there wasn't as many options for counselors. I know when I was in school, we didn't have a lot of options to go talk to somebody when we needed help or when we were having a hard time at school. So that's been a great change that has really came across since this has happened. We also talked about how we talked about the ways that technology has been able to expand our learning, like by doing virtual tours of places, which has been great. That's one thing that really kept us going during COVID, at least for my kids. We were able to go take tours of, you know, the Statue of Liberty and places all over the world. So that was really a great change. I feel like I'm leaving off a lot, so please jump in if I forgot any of your guys' really great talking points. But and then we did talk about how a lot of places don't have the access to technology, and that was one of the really one of the challenges that were faced throughout the community, is that some people didn't have that access to technology when the times had changed. Again, I'm probably leaving out, but it was really a great conversation just about the way things have really changed for elementary school and what we need to get back into the classroom, such as, you know, ways that teachers will be able to handle the behavioral health a lot better than before. But really those self-care options have been such a great change, that strength that has emerged from all of this. I think that's it. You guys add anything if you need to, though.
We did also talk about sort of schools shifting maybe a little bit finally to kind of giving kids different pathways rather than just you go to high school and then you go to college. And hopefully giving kids more, you know, do more aptitude testing earlier and kind of get these kids, you know, there's so much out there that you can do. Not everybody goes to college, so. But we're hoping that shifts. And just the highlight on finally talking about mental health and behavioral health.
Right on, thank you. Middle school group? Lisa?
Yes, hi, sorry, I didn't know if I was off of mute. So my team members are going to jump in on anything I may have missed, but we really had a candid conversation about what we're seeing in the classrooms right now. We're seeing a much larger shift in the sense of students that are being referred out into the community for services. So there's been an increase in that. There's just been an increase in student intensified need in general, that our tier 1s have jumped to 2s and our tier 2s have jumped to tier 3s. So we're definitely seeing a need and shift for those deficiencies to be addressed. A big discussion was that parents need to be modeling and also need to be active participants in treatment development plans, because a lot of times we see a correlation within what the child is facing and how they're responding with family history and families in crisis. So making those parents an active participant and being willing to be a part of that treatment plan for the student rather than just expecting us to quote unquote fix their child. We talked about how students now have a more intensified skill set that is a little more mature than the actual age group due to access and exposure to items on the internet. and not having that be really regulated well. And we talked a lot about resources needed for social emotional learning and peer mentoring programs with suicide prevention as a focus, and post-traumatic growth opportunities to be made more available, with those programs being rebuilt within the school systems. Did I miss anything, group?
I thought you did a great job. We did talk a little bit towards the end. We didn't get a chance to finish, but just to look at like treating the entire family, because a lot of times kids mimic behaviors of the adults in the family. And, you know, if the adult is depressed and the child is like exhibiting behaviors of depression, is it because they're modeling their parents, or is it, you know, or, you know, having to deal with like, you know, getting resources for the parent might be more crucial.
I wanted to also add that, you know, even when identifying these issues and concerns and increased needs, then the other factor, which is the workforce shortage, has made it especially difficult to meet needs. And I know that's challenges for schools, for providers, and what have you, to, you know, be able to provide a support team and outpatient team to address these. So that's the additional issue that compounds things too, I think, for this population.
Great, thank you, middle school group. Moving on to high school.
I'm happy to jump in if team members want to also add anything, if there's any gaps. One of the things we discussed is that a lot of the needs that are coming up also have kind of historical implications. Again, talking a little bit about historical trauma and how that's being triggered and playing out right now. We also had some insights that, you know, perhaps what's happening with some of the youth with their mental health has its roots in self-esteem issues going on with young folks in early elementary school that aren't being addressed, that are, you know, playing out in high school. In addition to that, there was some discussion around the potential of why so many students scored neutral on so many of the survey items, and potentially the role that grief and the stage of grief, of shock, could be playing, and these young folks just feeling meh, you know, not really hot or cold about an issue, but just kind of neutral. In addition, Richard, I believe, shared this idea or a metaphor of a young woman giving birth, and how there's, you know, so many appointments and so much support around, you know, the prenatal aspects. But when the child is born, it's like, all right, well, good luck. And sort of using that as a metaphor for this notion of a hard reset. When we talk about systemic change, when we talk about not incremental change, but transformational change, the need to kind of think more long-term. There were some insights that schools really need a center on the well-being of staff and students, but schools can't do this alone. The need for community-based organizations to be in partnership with schools was a huge piece. And also just kind of moving from a deficit perspective when engaging parents to really understand that, you know, they have the closest proximity to the problem as well as the closest proximity to the solution. So, you know, what are the cultural assets? What are the medicines that the parents already have, that they're already using, that maybe need to be affirmed and shared with other parents? There was also a lot of discussion. We could have, gone on for hours around the importance of authentic youth leadership. And when youth have authentic ownership in the organizations and programs they're a part of, they can also become these leaders who reach out to their peers, recruit more youth, and just really kind of getting out of their way. Susan sounds like she has some really interesting activities going around the state. So there was also some discussion of learning more from her, but I think that's about what I captured. Anything that I missed?
Hearing nothing, thank you, Roberto. And we're moving on to teachers and staff, and that's Yetta.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep it short because I see Mr. Volkmer on the call now, and he's got a big chunk of the remaining agenda. But I think probably the simplest way to sum it up is that there's been so many years of conversation and research around adverse childhood experiences that we just need to remove the word childhood and realize we all have had adverse experiences. And the faculty and staff right now are having their professional expectations to educate and show academic growth with students, but they're also in that position of recognizing they're having their own personal walk through this journey right now. And so the comments about overall well-being for students and adults on campus really resonated through our adult conversation also. And then just to speak to the training and supports and professional development, there's so much out there that as we thought we were supporting staff and providing opportunities and information and resources, that in itself got overwhelming. And so we finally just got to the point of saying, if you enter into space with an individual or a class and civility and care is your priority, you're doing the right things. You're on the right path. So yeah, just recognizing that all of us have gone through adverse experiences through this and wellness being a priority. That's it, unless any other adult group members want to speak in.
I think I would just add a quick comment, and I'll repeat it again because I talked a little bit about it in the adult group. You know, I feel like we're not talking about the big building blocks of public education. We're not talking about curriculum. We're not talking about all of those kinds of things, but we're really talking about all of the little things that we do every day, all day, all school year long, and you know how we work together with faculty, how we work together with the students. You know, there's something in, you know, being intentional in how that interaction gets designed, and I think that's kind of where the genuine healing can occur. And I think it's, you know, I think the tools are within reach, and I think that it's just about people coming together and really working together and make it happen. I would like to close the conversation with one short announcement, and something that I've talked a little bit about previously, but we've with the elementary school district here, we've been embarking on a project in partnership with the elementary district and Horizon Health and Wellness to shift the paradigm of mental health in the schools so that it's something that's available for all students and for all staff members. And we've been selected to participate in a national collaborative that is sponsored through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and their Safe Supportive Schools Unit. And I think we're working with the medical school at the University of Maryland. But this is really kind of about how do you make this transition from where we are today to really being a supporting and sustaining trauma-informed school campus. So we're just really early in the stages of this development, and you know, given where we are in Arizona today, we've got a long way to go to catch up with all of the other states that are participating in this collaborative. But I think that the groundwork that we're laying is really good, and I think that at some point soon, I think this is going to become more of a community initiative, and I think this is going to become something that's more available and accessible to everybody. And I'm happy to send this reading out to everybody, but it's just, you know, I think we've got a little bit going in the right direction. So big round of applause to Yetta for putting together today's program, and to Roberto for jumping in and helping us out today. And then also at this time, I think that we do have one item of business. So I'll pass that over to Kent, and the big piece that will come next is the advocacy and public policy update. So thanks for joining us, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, it's been an interesting morning. I certainly appreciate everybody's hard work on these breakout groups. You guys can hear me, correct? All right, I see some nodding of the head. moving on to advocacy and public policy. I know I see a few fresh faces. So normally what happens is I kind of kick this off and give you some updates of the craziness that's happening in downtown Phoenix at our state legislature. And then it's kind of open to the group to have discussions or to add anything to it. I will tell you that this is every year down at legislature is very weird. This is a particularly weird year. Just so you all know, I represent all of the county attorneys on the ACO board. So we get all of the bills kind of ran through us that sort of impact counties. And I just try and highlight some of the most important ones for everyone here. So there are some, I think, really good bills. There are some contraindicative bills. And I'm really just trying to hit the things that may be of interest here. I know we have a lot of people that are very interested in the youth. So there is a bill to essentially eliminate fees and fines for parents of kids that get in trouble. What we have found historically is that those that run through the juvenile justice system tend to be disproportionately lower on the socioeconomic spectrum. They tend to be less financially well off. And the fines and fees that are being placed on the families oftentimes aren't being paid. So there's been this sort of weight that's over both the families and the children. Because some of those fees are borne by the parents, but not all of them. Some are borne by the kids themselves. But if you're 14 years old, it's not like you really have a job. I think Susan said earlier, a lot of the stuff that kids work on, they don't get paid. And Susan's group makes sure that those kids get paid. But what happened is we discovered that some kids were entering adulthood with, debt hanging over their head. And then their families don't have anything, and it was creating friction in their families. And there was actually even some families that were not even willing to seek help and assistance when they needed it because of the cost associated with it. So there was a bill ran by Representative Blackman that seems to be moving pretty robustly through the system that would eliminate those fees. There was always the ability for judges to not issue them, but it seemed like no judge ever took advantage of that. So they did drop a bill to just eliminate the vast majority of those fees in their entirety. There are a number of kind of substance abuse related bills. There is a bill that our local representative, Neil Carter, brought forward, and it is to allow class 4 felonies that involve drugs to actually be charged as class 4 undesignated felonies. Just real quickly, the criminal justice system works one of two ways. It's either a stick or a carrot. Those are really our two options. Historically, our legislators have given us as prosecutors lots and lots and lots of sticks, not very many carrots. So it became somewhat difficult, and some people were essentially getting branded as felons for the rest of their life when it's probably not in their best interest. It wasn't in their family's best interest. So there is a bill that would allow for class 4 felonies, if they successfully complete probation, if they have treatment, if they do what they're supposed to, that it gets designated a misdemeanor and they don't have that scarlet F on their chest for the rest of their life. That has passed the House. It's been transmitted to the Senate. We'll see where that one goes. I'm very supportive of it. I've talked with Neil about it. I've testified on behalf of it a couple of times. There was another bill that I thought was a really good bill that did not pass, and I'm a little bit frustrated. It was called a judicial relief valve bill. Essentially, people will differ, but I think by and large, people will say that the system gets it right most times. I would say it's 99.9% of the time it gets it right, but sometimes it does get it wrong. Sometimes the sentence and the court's ability to sentence is so restricted that you end up putting people that you don't want to see in prison for a really long time. Let me give you a really good example. If you're addicted to methamphetamine, you get twice caught with methamphetamine, you're put on probation. You're put on probation again, you have 2 prior felonies, you get caught with methamphetamine a 3rd time, you're looking at a minimum prison sentence of 10 years in prison. If you go to trial and say, hey, that wasn't my meth, I want to go to trial, and you're convicted, the court cannot by law give you less than 10 years of prison. There's nobody in the world that would tell you that that's really an appropriate sentence, but there's no ability for the courts to deviate from that 10-year sentence. So there was a bill to say, look, if the judges explain why they're deviating, and it's tracked, and to make sure that they're not just always deviating and you don't have, disparate sentences depending on where you're at. I actually, again, testified in support of it, but it was a bill that was shot down. There seems to be a reluctance to allow judges to have judicial authority now. So there had been this push to give judges more authority. And then this year, there's been a giant pullback. There is a drug facilitated homicide bill. So if you are convicted of selling drugs to a person and the person overdoses on those drugs, it makes it much easier for that person to be charged with homicide. I'm going to be honest with everybody. I'm not very supportive of this bill. Conceptually, I understand what they're saying. We want to hold people accountable. The problem is we want to hold the bad actors accountable. And it's usually not the bad actors are the ones that we can tie it back to. It's usually two kids and it's their friend that gave them a pill, that chopped a pill with them. It's very rarely that we catch the dealer that's got thousands and thousands of pills. We catch the mule who's driving it. We catch somebody that's selling 2 or 5 or maybe 10 pills. Just to put in perspective, it's $2 a pill. So you're talking 10, maybe $20 worth of drugs. There is still the ability, if somebody gives a pill that is not, if they don't have any idea what it is, and it leads to that, there's still the ability that we can charge. But this is a bill to make it really easy to charge that. And a number of our legislators believe the solution is just to put everybody in prison. I don't think that's the best way to handle this. My philosophy is, and it has been, we cannot incarcerate our way out of an addiction. That's just, if we could, we wouldn't have a greater addiction issue today than we did 60 years ago when we started the war on drugs. But again, that's just my philosophy. Everybody's entitled to their own, but I'm just trying to go over some drugs that are some laws that may be of particular interest. Most of the craziness going on there is about election bills and just absolute silliness. And I don't even care where you fit on the political ideology spectrum. The stuff they are putting up is absolutely bonkers. And it is, in my opinion, there's been an abnormal amount of virtue signaling. There's one bill, let me tell you, that I think is just preposterous. And that is a bill that if you catch somebody spray painting or vandalizing your business and they have anything that could be deemed a dangerous instrument, which is anything, this pen is a dangerous instrument. There's actually a case that says not my fist, but if I had a prosthetic arm, my prosthetic arm is a dangerous instrument, anything. If you are caught spray painting about any business and you have anything that could be deemed a dangerous instrument, you can be shot and killed by the owner of the business. That scares me for our kids, quite frankly. Kids make really dumb decisions all the time. While I don't necessarily agree with him politically, I believe it was Senator Quijada, it was either Quijada or it was Senator Contreras. I forget which one actually made the comment, but they said this bill seems to say that property is worth the same thing as a human life. I fundamentally, personally disagree with that. But those are sort of the virtue signaling bills, and it was just absolutely kind of gross. I will tell you that if you are interested in the political system at all, this is not the time to pay attention. Everybody needs to pay attention, but this is not the time that you want to see like what good governance looks like. There is one really interesting bill that I kind of like that I do want to throw out just to everybody. It would split Maricopa up into 4 counties. Now, a lot of people say, and I didn't realize this when I supported it, it has to do with holding the board of supervisors accountable because the supervisors didn't overturn the election. And if that's the justification behind it, I think that's idiotic. But the other argument is, and this is what we see. Maricopa County is so large. I know a lot of you live there. A lot of you, also have a number of clients there, but Maricopa County has about 62.5% to 65% of our state's population. And what that means is anything that Maricopa does, if the other 14 states come, locked arms in unison and say, we want to do X, if Maricopa does Y, the state does Y because that's the majority of the state. So this breaks it up a little bit. And I can just tell you I think from a criminal justice perspective, I would love to see it. I mean, Maricopa County would still have 4. What is currently Maricopa County would have 4 of the 5 largest counties by population in the state of Arizona still. They named them 4 different. There's the Mogollon, there's the Hohokam, there is the O'odham, and then Maricopa stays, and it gets split. So it's essentially Central Phoenix, West Side, Southeast Valley, and then kind of a Scottsdale centric. Those are sort of the 4 generic breakups. It's very, very interesting. It would make a difference to all of us, though, because potentially if they break up, it might require a lot of access modifications, a lot of other jurisdictional boundaries, what you're covering and what you're not covering. Because again, you'd be split over counties. It would probably require there to be a bunch of stuff. Originally, that bill had a 1-year timeline. So on January 1st of 2023, it would be effective. They did make an amendment late last week to make that effective 2025. So it'd be 3 years to go there. Again, I just think you should all at least be aware of it. I don't have a lot. There's not a lot of good bills. This is the one thing I like to tell people. In 1913, first full year, the Arizona State, our criminal code, if you can't see me, was about 1.5 inches. That was the entirety. I'm 6'4". I can now spread my arms, and wider than my arms is the new criminal code. So for about 110 years, we put more and more and more and more bills in. Most of them don't need to be there. It's kind of ridiculous. What they've done is criminalized a lot of behavior that we don't want to criminalize, and nobody's willing to pull back on those strings. So it's a very frustrating season. Again, every Monday I'm in a meeting, and then I've testified basically every Tuesday and Thursday, or Wednesday and Thursday, for the last 1.5 months. And it is just a bunch of bad business. With that, I'll kind of turn it over. I'll answer any questions anybody has, but if anybody else has any positive information or anything that's going on in kind of public policy arena, I'd sure like to hear it. And just reach out. If you have issues, you have questions, Bob and I are always available. Bob's a much better resource than I am, but I'll help out any way I can. And then if there's stuff that you need for us to push out, let us know. I mean, we really are an information sharing network. We're looking at trying to do some action items, but we really do want to make sure we share info as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.